Hello, this is my response to Megan Murphy. The TERFs were right to hold the line. Obviously, I left my keyboard cats in the comments. But to this other woman, your actions are commendable. I agree with Megan in that it does take a lot of courage in order to admit that you were wrong about something. And it's easy to get wrapped up, especially because of social pressures and the immense weight to be included and to be um, part of something larger and altruistic, that it can override your better judgment. And, especially since we're social beings, and there are um, not just group dynamics or group psychology, if I were to allude to such things, that exerts itself upon individuals to the point for which it obliterates the self, right? You become part of this mob collective, and thus you lose your own ability to be critical. And that's one of the criticisms of authoritarianism, and that's usually from this collectivist communist ideology, and I'm gonna say pathos, right? And when I think of pathos, it's in relation to this trifecta of pathos, ethos, and logos. So, of course, the pathos is the path, the ethos is the ethics, and the logos is the logic. And you can't have one without the other two. That for which you would construct an argument in which to reason anything. And by that reasoning, shit. What's one of those other things that's such a huge drive in humanity, or of humanity, besides to be social? It's sex. It's reproduction. It's the survival instinct. And this is hijacked and manipulated in so many different convoluted ways, especially with the here and now. If I'm going to make a reference to the CBC, to keep this Canadian, this the social fabric, or mosaic, or melting pot, these larger figurative leviathans that oppress any differential and contradictory or confrontational, even, because that's what it becomes eventually. It becomes confrontational. Way of thinking that which is a real paradox, because eventually hyper individualism becomes collectivism, right? Diversity and inclusion equals homogeny and exclusion, right? Because of our evolutionary psychology, in that you look at other species, you look at other branches of mammals, or even lizards, and the obvious parallels, but not comparisons, in that which we are not different from those organisms. And this is a real wrench in the works of certain belief systems. You know, to think that we all evolved from the same, little, this little multicellular organism that decided to develop eyes and an anus. Over those millennia, we've developed new and interesting ways to dominate each other. And as I've expressed in other videos, all 760-ish or whatever it is now, that this expression of transgenderism as being one of the pillars of diversity is queer elitism, in which the betas are consistently flirting with other betas in order to learn how to have relationships with alpha females. And alpha females are the most fertile. And the same with alpha males. And if we're going to think about things in terms of evolutionary biology, this is the exact reasoning as to why and how we behave the way that we do. And to some people, that's reductionist. But ask a biologist, and they'll tell you, Darwin's not wrong. Survival of the fittest. And within our society, survival of the most intelligent, the most adaptable. Because we've created this system and this logic that for which every single person has an equal opportunity to foster offspring in order to sustain the survival of the species. And what transgenderism and homosexuality does is completely undercuts and insults the very essence of humanity. And this is why I'm in opposition to such things. It's not to say to these people that you are invalid or that you're not a person anymore. Is that your behavior is undesirable and that you need to learn to be straight. And it's a controversial thing to say. But I know for certain, as I've observed many, many times, that through other people's stories, the question arises, how do straight people reproduce? Copulation. How do gay people reproduce? Molestation. So there's a clear divide and difference between those two things. And that the downloading of trauma and of abuse is what inspires organisms to recoil from social interactions. And it's what causes these, or say what influences these people to become incestuous, as is exemplified by many experiments, which includes the mouse utopia experiment. Because when it comes down to it, transgenderism is a suicide cult. And this is backed up, this statement is backed up by this statistics. I'm not just speaking out of my ass just because I want to. And it's a great tragedy that I have suffered for speaking such things. Because there are, of course, entities out there that profit off of the slavery of these people. And profit off of the propaganda and the marketing. And this is what I don't like. This is what I don't like. You know, I'm not interested in exploitation. And, you know, speaking of these things doesn't make me a sneaker fucker. Okay. Of course I'm interested in having relationships with women. Of course I'm interested in having sex with women. It's only natural. But I didn't have a relationship for 7 years or more. And I suffered the abuse of both men and women alike. And so I sit here without validation. But you're not going to have validation when you speak these things because it's in contrary to a narrative of diversity, equality, and inclusion. Because here's what it comes down to. As I said in a previous video, okay? The queer elitism, and there is a fetishism to this, is absolutely true, right? And I say this, having sat in. Recently, it was about, well, last time I went to court. And this preceded my own, my own dealings with the Crown. An actual pedophilia case. And the man had a history. He had previous charges for luring. Okay? And he exposed these young women to pornography and masturbated in front of them. And then he offered them drugs. First it was marijuana, and then it was methamphetamine. So this corruption of sexuality is what angers me the most. Having had girlfriends, you know, say more than a decade ago, fall victim to this propaganda of diversity, equality, and inclusion. And this message for which they became soldiers of social justice upon their education in post-secondary realms. And then they went on to work with children. And that's terrifying. It's terrifying. And they carried the banner and they carried the torch of the slut walk. And they went forward and then they abused their psychiatric medications and their birth control and their hormones. And they started wandering around in ketamine or something else. And I'm the one that gets put in jail for such offenses of trying to intervene. And I'm not the only one to have suffered such a fate. There is real perversion and real exploitation amongst these people. Otherwise, gays for groomers would not exist. Or gays against groomers. Apologies. I don't think homosexuality is natural. I think it's a learned behavior. And I don't think transgenderism is a legitimate gender identification. And I stand with with England on this. They stopped the transgender surgeries. And I think Canada should too. I think we should stop enforcing it altogether, or allowing or funding any kind of it. I've seen some really ugly transgenders. I've seen even uglier gay people. When it comes down to it, again, I cite the book, Body Dressing. And then there's another book recently, I might put it in the comments, which is talking about symbology or status symbols and how we dress, body acceptance and stuff like this, like fat feminism and so on and so forth. These excuses for actually putting the work in, actually putting the reps in, actually going for a walk and incorporating physical activity into our everyday life. Because that's what we're built to be. We cannot ignore and negate this corporal form for higher pursuits of spiritual or altruistic gain. And I think that's a real mistake. And if you're Christian, that's exactly what Isaiah talks about. And Isaiah is the last book in the Old Testament before the New Testament, prophesizing the second coming, or the first coming of Christ, the first Savior, through John the Baptist. So once you're done with Plato's rape, right? Once you're done with the cornucopia of drugs, and you're done with being intoxicated and being put to sleep, then the real work starts. And it's ugly. It's ugly. And it ain't gonna get any better unless we look in the mirror and look at ourselves. These people believe that by altering the physical self, they can become a better metaphysical version, or a more true, a more holistic version of what was supposed to be. And our medical professionals use them as scientific experiments, because the devil works through consent, and they're more than willing to commit autogynephilia, or to have a skin graft and a phallus constructed from the flesh of their leg. And to me, that's absolutely fucking absurd. It's like a cyberpunk nightmare. The path to hell is paved with good intentions. And when you stand up against the Leviathan, you're going to get slaughtered. But eventually, more and more people will take your side. That's what I think. That's how I feel. I think that's enough for now.